Good morning, everybody. It's bright and early here where I live. Getting ready for a nice Labor Day weekend. This is a holiday for those of you not in the U.S. This week I wanted to talk to you about the dome. Last week we talked about the geography of a flat Earth. We came up with 8 proofs that the Earth can't be flat. Maybe we'll come up with a couple more today. Before we get into that, I had one short thing I wanted to include. We often hear this study about science, and in particular I hear like Sleeping Warrior, Nathan Oakley, some of these guys say, oh, you can't include that because that's not of the natural world. You're using equipment or something, technology. And it's because they looked up a definition of science in a dictionary that was designed for middle school students. So these are like young teenagers, 12, 13. So what they're getting is for this designed for kids, not for college students or adults. And so I wanted to tell you science, the definition of science. Science is the systematic study of the nature and behavior of the material and physical universe based on observation, experiment, and measurement, and the formulation of laws to describe these facts in general terms. It's quite a mouthful and lots of big words. I'll see if I can put that in the description so you guys can read it and digest it. But it really irritates me when we talk about studying the planets, and these flat earthers are saying, oh, you can't do that because that's not the natural world, that's beyond the earth. And so I've included this definition for you to think about. I'd love to hear comments about what you think of it. And so let's talk a little bit about having a dome. So as we talked last week, these are people, their beliefs, I'm not even quite sure how to phrase it, but these people believe that the earth is just a flat disc, circular disc. I've had some questions about that latitude and longitude are not real, even though people use them every day. Just things about the geography that don't make any sense. But don't forget that we also have an ice wall going around the edge. I found out yesterday people still believe that it's about 150 feet tall. I guess try to imagine what 150 feet is. My house is like 35 feet tall, so maybe five of my house stacked on top of each other. So, not something you could just overlook, if it were there. But to add to that, they have this dome that, as far as I know, they think it stretches over the earth, and it comes down and attaches either at or beyond the wall, this ice wall. So it's I don't know, like an upside down salad bowl, I guess. And they think it fits over the top of the earth to enclose us. I'm not really sure why we need to be enclosed if there's nothing else. Again, this belief comes from the Christian Bible. You can look in Genesis chapter 1, and in there they talk about the firmament, and flat earthers are convinced that that word firmament means a solid dome. The Hebrew word can be interpreted different ways, expanse, but flat earthers don't think that's what it is. Some of them, if you get them to admit it, they'll tell you that the dome divides the waters above from the waters below. I have never really understood that. I don't know what the waters above means. Waters below, I suppose, means the oceans and whatever water we have below. There are those that believe there might be gates in heaven. Some places in the Bible it talks about open the gates of heaven, and so they've decided that there are some kind of gates up there. The guy that I read about yesterday said that the dome was about 4,000 feet high. I think that's somewhere around 80 miles, something like that. And the composition of the dome is, again, something that you can get nobody to settle on. I've heard, it could be made of ice, so that if anything happens to it, it regenerates. Clear crystal. I think in one place somebody said it was sapphire, metal. I've heard hammered metal. And so, these guys cannot settle on what the makeup of this so-called dome is. I would think that's a red flag right there. The dome is, in my understanding, the dome is highly reflective, so that the sun, the moon, the stars all reflect onto the earth. The stars are inside the structure of the dome, so they're thinking the dome has some thickness, and inside that thickness are the lights that we call stars. The planets, planet came from an old, I don't know where from, but meaning wandering star. So the planets in the sky, when Galileo, Aristotle, some of these people were looking at the sky, they would see that some stars move faster than others. They move across the sky from night to night, week to week, whatever. And in fact, they noticed that there are some of them that have a retrograde motion, which means they move one way and then they turn around and move the other way, which I've always found curious, because how can stars that are fixed in a dome move different directions like that? And I never get an answer on that one. The sun and the moon are inside the dome, which means they're in the atmosphere. And we'll talk about those later on, but the sun and the moon are, they call them luminaries. They are not physical objects, they're luminaries. The sun gives off light and heat. And lately, a new thing is they started saying the sun puts off electromagnetic radiation, and that has something to do with what we would call gravity. They're not real clear on that. The moon is transparent, and it is a cold light. Somehow it sends cold light to the earth. What they're saying, again, I keep saying they're saying because it's just too ridiculous to believe in, but they're saying that if you do an experiment where you take a cup of water and put it out under the full moon in the open, that its temperature will be lower than if you put the same cup of water under the shade, in the moon shade, under a tree, or next to a building or whatever. That the temperature there is higher than the temperature in the open. So their conclusion is that the moon has to be transmitting cold light. And I can tell you that violates all the laws of physics. The moon cannot possibly be transferring cold to the earth. And if you want to study the second law of thermodynamics, that's one of the things that has become a flat earth mantra, is the second law of thermodynamics. And but if you look at that closely, it tells you that heat transfers to cold, and because of the laws of entropy, cold doesn't transfer to hot. You can't have a cold moon sending cold to the earth. It doesn't work that way. So I don't know if we'll talk about that more, but we might at a later date. Scientists call that effect reflective cooling, and it has to do with the fact that out in the open, the temperature from the earth transfers into the atmosphere quicker than temperature under a tree or next to a building. Those things retain heat, and so they warm up their neighborhood, the area around them, and you can go from that clearing to the shade, and you can see a difference. The only time I've seen them do that experiment, the difference has been 2 or 3 degrees, and sometimes the thermometers they use have a 2 or 3 degree error. So that's pretty hard to swallow. So we've kind of touched on the dome, what it's made of, the height of the dome, the sun and moon and the stars, and one more thing, if you think about, okay, so they're saying that the height of the dome is 4,000 miles. And sometimes I hear 3,000 to 4,000 miles. That's considerably higher than the ISS, or a lot of satellites are below that, but 3,000 miles, 4,000 miles, that's a large distance. And one thing I wanted you to think about, again, because flat earthers, one of the things they tell you now, this is a big thing, that the atmosphere has to be contained. That's why there's a dome. The atmosphere must be contained. Why? Didn't I tell you? The second law of thermodynamics, they say the gas atmosphere has to be contained, or space would suck the atmosphere right off the earth. Now, again, they kind of have an incorrect view or thinking of what a vacuum is. When they say it sucks the atmosphere off the earth, their mental thinking is like a vacuum cleaner. A vacuum cleaner. What they're really thinking about is that the atmosphere would move into the vacuum because of entropy. And we, of course, say that's not true because of gravity, which they don't believe also, because it messes up everything. Because of gravity holds down the gases, so that, for example, at sea level, the air pressure is much higher, and then as you go up in elevation or altitude, the air pressure lessens, and you can climb to the top of a mountain and you can tell in your breathing that the air pressure is less. Those people that go to the top of Mount Everest or Machu Picchu or places like that, sometimes they have to take oxygen with them because the air pressure is so low in those high altitude places. So we have clear observational evidence that the air pressure is higher at the ground level, sea level, and gradually lessens as it goes up. So constantly I hear, how does the atmosphere at 14.7 psi at the top? And that's not true. It is not 14.7 psi at the top. It's 0 psi. And boy, you hear all kinds of weird stuff about that. Some of them, they talk about 10 to the minus 17 torr as being some number. Let me tell you clearly, 10 to the minus 17 torr is a 0 point and 17 zeros before there's a number. So it's about as close to 0 as you can get. And so at the top of the atmosphere, as you're moving up, it gradually lessens the pressure until you're at the top and the air pressure is 0. Now, this is called the Kármán line, and you can look that up if you want. The Kármán line is sort of an arbitrarily defined line that separates the atmosphere from the outer space. The air pressure to 0 air pressure, and this line is at 62 miles. It's roughly 100 kilometers. So realize that this line, this dividing line, above that is 0 air pressure. Below that is the atmosphere. So this Kármán line is at 62 miles. And the dome that they're worried about is at 3,000 miles, 4,000 miles. So my question to them is, what's happening between the 62 miles and the 4,000 miles? There's a gap there, and so that gap should have been completely filled in by air. If they're talking about the atmosphere leaking off into space, then between that 62 miles and the 3,000 or 4,000 miles, there should be atmosphere in there. And there's not. It's been observed, it's been measured, and you can clearly see that there is not an atmosphere above that 62 miles. They measured that. They've sent up weather balloons. They do it all the time. It's clearly not, there's clearly no atmosphere above that 62 miles. So we have the dome, we have this, we have these heaven's gates or whatever, and we have all this information about the atmosphere that is not correct. So once again, I think this dome issue is a definite proof that the earth can't be flat and covered with a dome. Lately, again, most of the videos that I've seen lately, they've talked very little about the dome. They don't want you to think, oh, that's from the Bible, that's not science. And so I've heard some of them call it a membrane instead of a dome. I've heard, a lot of them, they don't even mention that because they don't want to talk about what that is. And then they talk about so they don't talk about the dome, and a lot of them now, instead of saying that there's a dome, they're saying that there cannot be air pressure without a container. So you're going to hear this a lot. There has to be a container or there cannot be air pressure. Second law of thermodynamics. And so on and on, they continually harp on this, and you're going to hear a lot about it. But I can guarantee you that there's a problem between that 62 miles and their 3,000, 4,000 mile dome. So those are the things I wanted you to think about this dome. And so next week we'll have a new topic. I do have homework for you this week, so I expect you to be sure and watch the video I leave in the description, and also think about all of these things I've told you. Be sure to comment, because I always want to hear what you think about these things, or what you've seen, what you've read. And I look forward to seeing you next week. So have a good week, everybody.